They said it was waiting for us. If we played by the rules, worked hard, stayed honest, and never gave up, we'd make it. The home with a wraparound porch in Lakeside Valley. 2 kids. A sturdy roof, a hot dinner by 6, and weekends off for hiking. Maybe even a second car in the driveway and a golden retriever wagging its tail when we came home from work. That was the story, told in brochures, in classroom posters, and in commercials with smiling families. It was more than a dream. It was a promise. A covenant whispered to each of us like a lullaby. Do your part, and life will do the rest. But then came the years, the bills that multiplied like weeds, the degrees that cost more than homes, the jobs that paid less than rent, the exhaustion that set in, not from laziness, but from trying so hard for so long, and still feeling behind. You looked around and realized you weren't alone. Everyone's running. Everyone's tired. And no one seems to be arriving. So you start to wonder, what if the dream was never real? What if the finish line was always moving? Not because you were too slow, but because the map was drawn that way on purpose? And deeper still, what if this isn't freedom at all, but a sophisticated cage? Not built of iron, but of expectation. Not locked by guards, but by shame. A system where rest feels like failure, and struggle feels like virtue. It's here we begin. Not with outrage, not with rebellion, but with a single, radical act, asking the question that's hardest to face. Whose dream am I chasing? And who benefits if I never catch it? Because as Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, the most effective prison is the one where the prisoner doesn't know he's confined. And maybe, just maybe, we've all been dreaming inside walls we never chose. You wake up to the sound of a notification. Not an alarm clock, no, something worse. A message from your bank. Your balance is lower than you expected. Again, you rub your eyes and calculate quickly in your head. Rent is due in 4 days. Groceries need restocking. Gas tank's almost empty. And your younger brother needs help with his college application fee. So you get up. You show up. Again. At the same job, in the same office, or maybe behind a different counter. Under different fluorescent lights. But the feeling is always the same. You're running, not towards something, but away from collapse. This is life in Midridge County. A town like thousands of others, where the average person works 50 hours a week and still hesitates before seeing a doctor. Where families rotate credit cards like chess pieces just to cover groceries. Where 64% of people live paycheck to paycheck, and nearly half have done so consistently for years. Without a single break, you meet Clara Jenkins. She's 31, a night shift nurse at Fairmount General Hospital. Soft-spoken, kind, and always tired. Clara clocks in at 10 p.m. and leaves at 7:30 the next morning. Then she heads to her second job, taking blood pressure and doing paperwork at a local senior home. She sleeps maybe 4 hours a day. She hasn't had a weekend off in 5 months. But when you ask her how she's doing, she smiles. She says, "I'm grateful to be working. A lot of folks aren't." And she means it. Because that's how deep the loop goes. We've been taught to be thankful for exhaustion, to wear burnout like a badge, to measure our value by how much we can endure without breaking. But step back, even just a little, and you'll see, this isn't discipline. It's quiet desperation. It's life as a treadmill, always moving, never arriving. Clara once dreamed of becoming a midwife. She wanted to help bring life into the world. But student loans, rising rent, and her mother's medical bills buried that dream. Now she says, "I'm just trying to keep up. I can't even think about what I wanted anymore." And she's not alone. There's Leo Alvarez, 42. He's a senior account manager at Northwell Central, a finance firm in the city. He's got the suit, the title, the LinkedIn endorsements. But last week, Leo cried in his car. He didn't tell anyone, because people like Leo aren't supposed to cry. They're supposed to handle it. He doesn't hate his job, but he hates what he's become in order to keep it. Disconnected, stretched thin, dead inside, but functional. Leo works late, skips dinner, sleeps 5 hours a night. And when he has time off, he shops online. He scrolls through other people's highlight reels. He buys things he doesn't need to remind himself he still exists. That's what the system sells you. Not just products, but a way to numb the ache of not living the life you imagined. We think we're hustling to get ahead, but for most of us, we're just hustling not to fall behind. We're told to grind, to push through, to earn it. But when the goalposts keep moving, when success always stays just out of reach, you have to ask, was it ever really meant for you? This is no longer about temporary struggle. It's a permanent condition, a cycle so normalized that anything outside of it feels irresponsible. Clara doesn't take vacations. She can't afford to. Leo can, but he doesn't, because he knows that the moment he slows down, someone else will be waiting to replace him. And that's the design. A system that keeps you afraid to stop. That teaches you your value is directly tied to how much you can sacrifice. You are not lazy. You are not behind. You are not broken. The loop is. The blueprint you were given was never made to set you free. It was built to keep you productive, obedient, tired enough not to rebel, hopeful enough not to quit, busy enough not to question. So what do? You run. You perform. You smile. You post your achievements and bite your tongue about your pain. Because the loop has taught you that suffering is noble and rest is indulgent. But deep down, something in you remembers. There was a time when life felt open, when you believed in possibility, when you imagined a future not marked by debt and exhaustion. That memory, that ache, that's the part of you that hasn't surrendered. And it's that part we'll need as we begin to ask deeper questions about the morality we've inherited, the virtues we've been sold, and the silent contracts we signed without ever reading the fine print. Because in the next part of our journey, we meet a man who saw this coming more than a century ago. He didn't have TikTok. He didn't live in Midridge County. But he understood the truth about power, pain, and the illusions that keep us docile. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. And what he saw might just change how you see yourself. He lived more than 100 years ago. Yet somehow, Friedrich Nietzsche saw us. Not us exactly, not Clara or Leo or you or me, but the shape of our despair, the form of our fatigue. He called it slave morality, not because we are enslaved by force, but because we internalize our own chains. Nietzsche believed that when people lack power, they don't just surrender control. They reshape morality itself to justify their condition. They start calling their obedience virtue, their struggle honor, their silence wisdom. It sounds noble. It feels good, because it has to. When you're tired and unseen, when you're at the bottom of a system that won't let you rise, you have two choices. Believe the system is wrong, or believe that suffering makes you righteous. And most of us, even without knowing it, choose the second. We celebrate humility, not because we're naturally humble, but because power punishes pride. We praise patience, not because it heals us, but because urgency gets labeled as entitlement. We glorify endurance, because that's what's left when ambition is crushed. Look around. Our culture is soaked in this moral code. We post about our all-nighters. We admire people who never take a break. We repeat mantras like, "No pain, no gain," as if exhaustion were a sacrament. Clara once said, "I don't mind being tired. At least I'm useful." But why have we equated usefulness with worth? Why do we measure our value by how much we deplete ourselves? Because we've been taught that the good person is the one who endures the most, not the one who feels joy, not the one who rests, but the one who suffers quietly. Nietzsche warned us. Morality is not the same as virtue. Sometimes, it's just the survival strategy of the oppressed. It's a harsh truth, but it explains why so many people stay stuck. Not because they're trapped by bars, but because they believe escape is selfish. They believe that saying no is ungrateful, that choosing themselves is wrong, that questioning tradition is arrogance. And so they stay in jobs that drain them, in relationships that diminish them, in routines that numb them. They call it discipline. But what it often is resignation. Nietzsche didn't romanticize suffering. He didn't believe that pain makes us holy. He believed that pain becomes dangerous when it becomes identity. When we stop seeing exhaustion as a signal and start seeing it as a badge. Because once we idolize our struggle, we stop asking why we're struggling in the first place. And that's when we become easy to control. A tired person is less likely to rebel. A burned-out mind doesn't have the energy to dream. And someone who believes their worth is tied to their work will never stop working long enough to ask who profits from their sacrifice. So we build shrines to hustle. We elevate figures who grind harder than anyone. We turn stress into status. And somewhere in the process, we forget that life was never meant to be endured. It was meant to be lived. But here's the twist. Nietzsche didn't tell us to abandon morality. He told us to recreate it, to go beyond borrowed values, to rise above the morality of the herd. He called this person the Übermensch, not a tyrant or a brute, but someone who dares to craft their own compass. The Übermensch doesn't ask, "What do others say is good?" They ask, "What is truly good for me, for life, for vitality, for truth?" It's not about ego. It's about authorship, about stepping out of the mold and asking, "What values have I inherited without consent? What have I accepted simply because everyone else did? What if virtue is not in suffering, but in creating a life worth waking up for?" It's a radical shift, because it means that rest can be righteous, that joy can be discipline, that choosing peace isn't weakness, it's power. But power, Nietzsche reminds us, always begins with awareness, with recognizing when your values serve you, and when they serve someone else. So when Clara says, "I'm just trying to be good," you want to ask, good by whose standards? When Leo skips meals to meet impossible deadlines, you want to ask, is that commitment or conditioning? And when you feel guilty for slowing down, you have to ask, whose voice is whispering the guilt into your ear? And why do you trust it more than your own body? The morality of the tired is not evil. It's just unexamined. It was built for survival in a world that never made room for our joy. But Nietzsche believed joy is worth fighting for. Not fleeting pleasure, not distraction, but the joy that comes from living in alignment with your truth. And that begins with seeing the stories you've been told, the slogans you've repeated, the gold stars you've collected on a path you never chose. It begins when you stop asking, "Am I doing enough?" and start asking, "Is this even worth doing?" It begins when you feel that flicker, that little voice that says, "There's more to life than this loop." Because there is. But to find it, you must first recognize that the morality you carry might not be yours at all. And once you see that, you can begin to write your own. We tell ourselves we're free because we can choose our job, our phone plan, our Netflix profile picture, because we can vote, because we can change careers, move cities, open a side hustle. But freedom isn't measured in options. It's measured in autonomy. And that is something else entirely. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this better than most. He wasn't a dreamer. He didn't believe in utopias. He studied the brutal machinery of power, and what he found was unsettling. You don't need to control people by force, he said. You just need them to believe they're in control. Welcome to Grainer Hills, a model suburban town. Tree-lined streets, drive-thrus on every corner, and smiling realtors promising, "You're the master of your destiny." Here, people feel free. They post quotes about mindset and manifestation. They listen to podcasts on how to 10x their productivity. They decorate their homes with signs that say, "Bright now, shine later." And yet, they are tired, heavily indebted, anxious, disoriented. They're not being chased by soldiers. No one's pointing a gun at them. But still, they can't stop. Why? Because the chains aren't physical. They're psychological, invisible, strategic. In Grainer Hills, the average family carries over $98,000 in debt. Student loans, medical bills, auto leases, and mortgages they'll spend 30 years paying off. They're told, "You're investing in your future." But what they're really doing is buying into the system with interest. You don't need bars on the window if people are too scared to lose what's inside. This is the brilliance Machiavelli saw coming. Control not through violence, but through illusion. Let people feel powerful, while you quietly script the limits of their choices. You can change jobs, as long as you stay employed. You can move cities, as long as you pay rent. You can start a business, as long as you have credit. What you can't do, what's quietly off limits, is step off the treadmill entirely. Because if you stop working, you stop paying. And if you stop paying, you stop mattering. That's the core trade. You exist in this system because you fuel it. And the moment you step out, you risk being erased. Clara knows this. She once considered quitting one of her jobs. She wanted to breathe, to rest, to spend time with her niece. But the rent was due. The lights needed to stay on. And her insurance, tied to her employer, would vanish if she walked away. So she stayed and told herself, "Maybe next year." Leo knows it too. He dreams of writing music, of recording a full album. But the firm has a promotion coming up. And his parents didn't work this hard just so he could play guitar. So he stays and tells himself, "Maybe after I hit my next bonus." This is not freedom. This is performance. A scripted life with just enough improvisation to make you feel like the director. Machiavelli warned rulers, "Let the people see the stage, never the scaffolding." Meaning, make the show grand. Keep the lights bright. Keep the distractions endless. But never let them glimpse the structure holding it all up. In Grainer Hills, that structure is built from debt agreements buried in fine print, healthcare plans that punish the unemployed, college degrees that cost more than starter homes, work cultures that glorify exhaustion. It's a system so complete, so elegantly invisible, that people begin to believe this is just how life is. They don't ask, why is survival so expensive? Why is rest a privilege? Why is healthcare tied to employment? Why is education a lifelong financial trap? They don't ask because they're too busy surviving. too exhausted to rebel, too distracted to reflect, too indebted to walk away. And that's how modern control works. Not by pushing you down, but by keeping you chasing something. Just out of reach. Just enough hope to stay in the game. Just enough dopamine to keep scrolling. Just enough praise to keep you loyal. We've traded kings for contracts, guards for guidelines, chains for subscriptions, and the result is eerily effective. People feel responsible for their own captivity. I chose this job. I agreed to the loan. I clicked accept. Yes, but were you really free to say no? Were you free to walk away without risking your health, your housing, your family's stability? Because if you can't say no, then your yes is just another illusion. The genius of this system is that it convinces you that everything is your choice, so that when it breaks you, you blame yourself. But Machiavelli knew better. He knew the game was never fair. He didn't ask rulers to be kind. He asked them to be strategic. And the most strategic power is the one you don't see, the kind that lives in your daily routine, in the deadlines you can't push, in the shame you carry for needing rest, in the debt that follows you like a shadow. So when Clara stays, when Leo sacrifices himself, when you feel guilty for slowing down, ask yourself, is this freedom or a stage I've mistaken for real life? Because if the structure is invisible and the script is written in obligation, then maybe it's time to step off the set, not with anger, not with fire, but with clarity, because awareness, as Machiavelli would agree, is the first real act of power. The body breaks slowly, but the mind breaks in silence. You don't always notice it at first, just a heaviness in the mornings, a craving for noise, a shrinking of joy. You tell yourself it's just a phase, just stress, just life. But what if it isn't? What if what you're feeling is systemic exhaustion, engineered by a world that survives by keeping you just functional enough to continue? In Northwell Central, Leo scrolls after midnight. He's tired, but he's not sleeping. He's watching stories, comparison reels, videos of people his age buying homes, starting companies, smiling at infinity pools in Santorini. He doesn't resent them. He resents himself. Why not him? So he clicks. He buys a digital course on how to optimize your morning. He orders supplements. He adds another productivity app to his phone. And for a moment, he feels in control until the next day comes and nothing changes because consumption can't fix what consumption caused. The system that drains your energy is the same one that sells you relief. It sells you solutions to problems it created. Work too much? Here's a time management hack. Feeling burned out? Here's a luxury weekend retreat. Lonely? Here's an AI chatbot that understands you, but it never asks, why are you working so much? Why are you burned out? Why do you feel alone in a world more connected than ever? Because the answers would point inward, toward a truth the system doesn't want you to see. You are not broken. The world you live in is misaligned. You are not behind. You are drowning in expectations designed to keep you insecure. You are not lazy. You are resisting a model of life that was never meant to nourish you, only to extract from you. And yet, the guilt persists, because you've been taught to tie your identity to your productivity, to measure worth in output, to conflate being busy with being valuable. This is the real brilliance of the machine. It doesn't just own your time. It reshapes your self-image. When Clara skips her only day off to pick up another shift, she tells herself it's because she's strong. When Leo overcommits, he tells himself it's because he's driven. But beneath those words lies fear. fear of being seen as unworthy, fear of being left behind, fear of stopping and realizing he doesn't know who he is without the work. This is no longer about labor. It's about identity engineering. The system doesn't just want your hours. It wants your loyalty. It wants you to believe that exhaustion is integrity, that rest is weakness, that disconnection is natural. Because as long as you believe that, you won't resist, you'll adapt, you'll perform, you'll self-correct before anyone else has to. And eventually, you'll stop dreaming altogether. You'll stop asking, "What do I love?" and start asking, "What can I monetize?" You'll stop wondering, "What brings me peace?" and start asking, "What keeps me competitive?" And slowly, piece by piece, you will disappear. Not to the world. You'll still be online, still answering emails, still hitting deadlines. But to yourself, you'll be gone, and no one will notice, because they're disappearing too. In Grainer Hills, people don't collapse in public. They burn silently, behind perfect lawns, behind six-figure LinkedIn titles, behind family photos edited to look happier than they felt. And in that silence, the machine thrives. It doesn't have to censor you. You'll censor yourself. It doesn't have to imprison you. You'll stay where you are out of fear. This is the loop behind the loop. The psychological trap that makes burnout feel like morality, and self-erasure feel like responsibility. And the saddest part? We blame ourselves. We think, "If only I were more disciplined. If only I managed my time better. If only I had a better mindset." But the truth is, the deck was stacked. From the beginning, we inherited a blueprint that glorifies sacrifice and monetizes our insecurities. A society where attention is currency, exhaustion is proof of commitment, and consumption is therapy. A society that thrives when you're too tired to ask why things feel so off, too distracted to sit in silence, too anxious to question the path you're on. So what do? You scroll, you spend, you compare, you double down, not because you're shallow, but because that's the only language you were given. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the algorithms and obligations, there's a flicker, a memory, a murmur, a whisper that says, "This isn't what I came here for." And that whisper is not weakness. It's a signal that part of you has survived, the part that still believes in something more than this performance, something quieter, something slower, something real. But the system won't lead you there. It has no interest in your peace, only your participation. So if you want to find your way out, you'll have to stop chasing what it rewards. You'll have to pause long enough to hear your own voice again. And when you do, you'll see what Nietzsche and Machiavelli tried to tell us. The trap was never just external. It lives in our thoughts, our habits, our self-concepts. But if the trap is in the mind, then so is the key. You don't need a whip to be enslaved. Not anymore. All it takes now is a password, a login, a performance review, and a quiet voice inside that says, "You are what you produce." This is modern slavery, not enforced by violence, but by metrics. Clara knows the metrics well. She's graded on patient turnaround time, how quickly she can clean, inject, discharge, document. No one asks if she smiled. No one counts the comfort she gave. Only the speed. Only the numbers. Leo knows them too. Client retention rate. Quarterly growth. Inbox 0. Every day, he wakes up not to live, but to perform. For a dashboard. For a spreadsheet. For metrics that determine whether he's still worth it. In this world, your humanity is secondary. What matters is your output. And if your output slows, the system doesn't ask what's wrong. It simply assumes you've stopped trying. This is how value becomes conditional. You're useful until you're not. You're respected until you can't keep up. And that pressure? It's constant. Relentless. But precisely because it's not violent. It's hard to name. Hard to resist. Hard to even notice. Because it comes wrapped in praise. You're called a go-getter, a grinder, a high performer. But beneath the applause, you're burning out. You're skipping meals. You're numbing with caffeine and dopamine. You're living with tension so constant. You mistake it for your personality. And when you finally collapse, the system quietly replaces you, like a worn-out gear in a never-ending machine. And still, you blame yourself. That's the real trap. But modern slavery doesn't stop with metrics. It extends into your wallet. Consider this. You work long hours to afford the tools that let you keep working. You subscribe to software that automates your calendar. You pay for fitness apps to combat your sedentary job. You buy noise-canceling headphones to focus in loud environments created by your own overstimulation. You're paying to survive the very conditions your work created. This is slavery by subscription. Not to a king, not to a master, but to a monthly fee. Streaming services, cloud storage, mental health apps, online courses you never finish, each one a small, manageable cost, until they're not, until you realize you're locked into a lifestyle that requires you to earn just to keep up with the tools you bought to keep earning. It's brilliant and cruel, because it feels like empowerment, but it's dependency, disguised. Then come the contracts, housing leases, student loans, employment agreements with clauses you never read. Clara is still paying off a certification she needed to apply for her second job. The course costs $9,400. The job pays $15 an hour. Leo's medical insurance is tied to his job. If he leaves, he loses coverage for his heart medication. He's not staying for fulfillment. He's staying to stay alive. Tell us, how is that different from chains? This is the invisible cage. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't lock you in. It makes you lock yourself in out of fear. And when you try to pause, to rest, to think, you're bombarded by the feed, by promotions, by advice columns telling you how to optimize even your leisure. And so you go back to running, because in this cage, stillness feels dangerous. You're not just trapped physically, you're trapped cognitively. You no longer believe rest is allowed. You feel guilt when you take a break. You apologize for boundaries. You justify time spent doing nothing, because somewhere along the way, you absorb the lie. If I'm not producing, I'm not valuable. And that lie is the lock on the cage. Modern slavery isn't about external control. It's about internalized obligation, self-surveillance, voluntary compliance with systems that harm you. It doesn't look like oppression. It looks like adulthood. You call it maturity, responsibility, being realistic. But is it? Or is it just a life built entirely around other people's expectations? You can choose your phone background. You can pick your brand of coffee. But you can't choose to stop working without risking your ability to live. That's not freedom. That's survival under pressure. And here's the final illusion. You think you're the problem. You think you need more discipline, more planning, more ambition. You don't. You need a different system, a different metric for success, a different definition of what it means to live a worthy life. But before you build that, you have to see what you're inside of now. because the hardest prisons to escape are the ones you never knew you entered. So ask yourself, is your life yours? Or is it a long list of obligations you never questioned, but always obeyed? Is your exhaustion a sign of purpose, or proof that the system is working as designed? Because until you question the cage, you'll keep decorating it, keep optimizing it, keep mistaking your chains for ambition. Every illusion has a breaking point. It may come quietly, a sleepless night, a cracked voice in a meeting, a single thought that won't go away. What if this isn't life? What if this is just survival in disguise? That thought is dangerous, but it's also sacred, because it means something in you still remembers joy not tied to productivity, time not measured in metrics, love not earned through exhaustion. And that memory is the beginning of awakening, not a revolution in the streets, but a rebellion of awareness. The realization that the world you've been sprinting through was not built for your well-being, but for your compliance. Nietzsche called it the moment when the individual becomes the creator of value, no longer borrowing morality from others, but shaping meaning from within. It's the moment you stop asking, "How do I keep up?" and start asking, "Why am I even running?" The first step in reclaiming your life isn't escape. It's recognition, seeing the system not as fate, but as structure. A structure that was built. And what is built can be unlearned. That's power, not in destruction, but in clarity. Because when you see the cage, you stop polishing it. You stop confusing pain with virtue. You stop offering your peace as payment for your place in the crowd. And then you begin to choose, slowly, but radically. You choose to live beneath your means, not out of fear, but from a desire to breathe. You choose to say no to what empties you, even if it once made you feel worthy. You choose silence over noise, presence over performance, enough over always more. You choose not to be an asset, but a person, messy, inconsistent, but whole. And yes, the world will push back. They'll say you're lazy, that you've lost your edge, that you're wasting your potential. But ask them, wasting it by whose definition? Because the metrics you once bowed to are not universal laws. They were designed, and you get to redesign. Leo learned this the day he stopped chasing a promotion. He declined it, told his boss he'd rather take a 4-day work week. They said no, so he said goodbye. Now he works part-time at a music studio. He makes half the income, but writes music again. He breathes deeper, sleeps better, feels like himself. Clara learned it too. She applied for a role that let her work remotely, doing patient intake support, less hours, lower pay. But she gets to cook with her niece. She goes to the park. She started painting again. Neither of them is perfect. They still worry, still calculate, still live in a world that doesn't always support their choices. But they're not asleep anymore. And that makes all the difference. Because when you awaken, you don't need permission. You don't need validation. You don't need to wait for the system to approve your healing. You just begin with one small act of defiance. You rest. You say no. You delete the app. You cancel the subscription. You tell someone the truth. You reclaim the smallest parts of yourself first. The moments, the breath, the mornings without urgency. And from there, you rebuild. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. One rooted in alignment, not expectation. In clarity, not guilt. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop measuring your life by timelines you didn't write. And suddenly, freedom stops being a slogan and becomes a texture, a rhythm, a way of moving through the world with your eyes open. This is the awakening Machiavelli feared, because a person who sees the scaffolding can no longer be managed by the stage. This is the liberation Nietzsche envisioned, not freedom from responsibility, but from inherited roles and values that no longer serve the soul. And this awakening? It's contagious. When one person opts out of the performance, others begin to question their roles too, and eventually, the script falls apart. Not because someone tore it down, but because enough people stopped acting. So what now? You don't need to quit your job tomorrow. You don't need to move to a cabin or delete everything. You just need to start listening. Listening to your exhaustion, to your curiosity, to the parts of you that speak not in spreadsheets, but in sensation. You already know what needs to shift. Not everything, not at once, but something. And that something is the hinge. The moment the cage creaks open, no key, no protest, just a choice. To stop performing, to start living. We began with a dream, a quiet promise whispered across generations. Work hard, stay honest, follow the path, and life will reward you. A home, security, purpose, freedom. But somewhere along the way, that dream blurred. It became a formula, a template, a checklist so rigid, it stopped being a dream and became a debt. And so we ran, all of us. Some to catch it, some to escape it, some because we didn't know how to stop. But now, we do, because in the stillness, between one obligation and the next, we've begun to hear a different voice. Not the loud one shouting productivity, not the sly one selling perfection, but the soft one, the buried one, the voice that asks, "What was your dream? Before the world handed you one? What did you want? Before algorithms told you what success looked like? What mattered to you? Before your time was monetized? Your passions packaged? Your life compressed into content? Because that dream, it still exists. Not in a catalog, not in a brochure, but in the quiet places you were taught to ignore. In the long walks you stopped taking, in the hobby you labeled a waste of time, in the nap you never allowed yourself, in the story you told yourself you'd write someday. That is the real dream, not the American dream, not the corporate vision, not the highlight reel on social media, but yours, the one shaped by meaning, not marketing, by curiosity, not competition, by breath, not burnout. And no, it won't come with guarantees. No gold watch at retirement, no applause from the system, no neat line of validation. But it will come with something rarer, authenticity, the feeling of looking at your own life and recognizing it, the peace of knowing that, even if you're tired for something real. Even if you're working on something that lights your soul. Even if you're uncertain, the path you're on is yours. Clara is starting to understand this. She's not rich. She still worries about bills, but she paints again, not to sell, not to post, just to feel. She says, "For the first time in a long time, I'm doing something that doesn't ask me to prove I deserve to exist." Leo understands too. He still shows up to work, still keeps the lights on, but on weekends he records one song at a time. Not to make it big, but because the music was always his. He just forgot. And maybe that's where we all begin. Not by burning down the world, but by lighting a candle inside it. Choosing 1 hour a day where you don't explain yourself. One moment a week, where you do something purely because it brings you alive, not because it's efficient, not because it's marketable, but because it's true. And from that 1 hour, that one breath, that one choice, a new life begins. Not a fantasy, but a life with rhythm, with intention, with space. A life where rest is sacred, where love is not scheduled, where worth is not earned, where you don't have to deserve peace. You just allow it, because the truth is, you were never meant to chase a dream. You were meant to dream awake, to step off the treadmill, look around, and ask, if I could write the story from here, what would I say no to? And what would I finally say yes to? This isn't about quitting everything. It's about choosing something with eyes open, because that's the most radical act in a system built on performance. To live with presence, to move with care, to define success on your terms, even if no one claps. And once you do, you begin to see it. Freedom was never in the goal. It was in the ownership of the journey, not the dream they handed you, but the one you shape, day by day, choice by choice. And that dream, it doesn't need approval. It doesn't need applause. It just needs you. So we end where we began. A dream. But this time, not the dream sold in textbooks. Not the one marketed with slogans and interest rates. Your dream. The quiet one. The buried one. The real one. Still here. Still waiting. Still yours. No permission required. No gatekeepers. Only this question. Will you keep chasing the illusion, or start living what's been yours all along?